legalization of recreational marijuana use in Canada is just around the proverbial corner. Joining me is Julian Fantino, Executive Chairman of Aleafia Health, medical cannabis company, and the former Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, Toronto Chief of Police, and London, Ontario Chief of Police. Julian, thank you for joining us. I didn't get the name of the company. I didn't pronounce it correctly. What is it?
It's Aleafia, Roy.
Aleafia.
Yes, basically focused on medical cannabis right now.
Yeah, and that's that really is a major trend where people are trying medical cannabis for any number of ailments with individual levels of success, but there's a great interest in this.
Well, it's been legal for a dozen or more years, and more people are turning to it where conventional medicine does not seem to be able to help them out with such things as chronic pain, sleep deprivation, anxiety, post-traumatic stress. So my first exposure to all of this was with our veterans and some of the help that they were seeking with alternate medical intervention, if you will, and turning to medically prescribed cannabis really helped them a great deal.
And you, of course, were the Federal Minister of Veterans Affairs. So the difference between the medical cannabis and what's going to be available for personal consumption is quite significant. You don't get high from medical cannabis. There'll be a certain amount of that with the recreational stuff. How much of a challenge is the different approaches, Julian, being taken on the sale of marijuana by different provinces? Province A has this approach, Province B has that one, and Province C takes a completely different approach.
Well, it's a bit confusing, actually. The federal government, in its right and entitlement and authority, have decreed legalization, and the actual implementation of all of that was left to the provinces and the territories. So what you really have is you have individual approaches that have been or are being put in place to deal with the legalization issue, but more to do with the actual distribution of marijuana. In the medical side, it's quite different, actually. The gatekeeper is always a medical doctor. He or she do an assessment. They look at the individual as they do with every other ailment and make the determination whether or not that person is a good subject to be helped with medical cannabis. So, but the recreational thing right now is a bit confusing to a lot of people, no doubt. But, as with every new piece of legislation, things do shake out eventually.
Would taking more time for the legislation, and quite a few people were recommending this, would taking more time for the legislation have been advisable, or did they take enough time?
I think it's a good thing to do. These are very complex issues. The complications extend far and wide. Obviously, you've heard the issues that are pertinent to law enforcement, for instance. The new piece of legislation, Bill C-46, that just passed, enacting new authorities for the police and, of course, new technologies as well. But, eventually the courts will have to deal with so much of this as they did with alcohol-impaired driving. So taking time, I think, in this circumstance with such a complex piece of legislation and so many issues that impact, I think is a good thing.
Driving under the influence, I'll talk about C-46. I think where the Supreme Court's going to probably get involved very early, as quickly as Supreme Court's got involved, but that will be where police don't have to have any suspicion that someone's driving impaired in order to stop the motorist and to insist on a breathalyzer test. That's going to be something somebody will challenge very quickly. Oh,
absolutely, Roy. I was around for all of the issues that became part of the scene with respect to alcohol-impaired driving, the alcohol testers, the authorities of the police, when you can do this, when you can do that. It's going to be the same kind of up and down the court system situation long before this thing settles. So going back to your earlier comment, which I think is valid, taking time in these circumstances to do things as best as you can up front, anticipating as one should the challenges that are going to happen is a good thing, and hopefully that can be done in a way that will prevent a lot of anxiety and difficulties later.
Is there something, Julian, in particular that we have learned from jurisdictions where marijuana has been legalized, which we can and perhaps should apply to Canada?
Well, absolutely, and that has been part of the situation as well. There's been the marijuana, the legalization task force put in place by the Prime Minister. They did a lot of work. In fact, my colleague with Aleafia, Raf Sukar, former Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP, was one of those members, and they traveled widely and they did the research. They did the kind of in-depth analysis of consequences, issues, and in that regard, we hope that some of those things will preempt difficulties here. But there will be difficulties, no doubt, as we always know with new pieces of legislation.
Mm-hmm. Well, people will be driving high, and there will have accidents, and people will die because somebody's driven high. Is the law sufficiently developed to address the situation as well as it does driving under the influence of alcohol?
Not quite, Roy. That you raise a good point because, for instance, in regards to alcohol, impaired driving, we have intoxilizers, we had roadside screening devices. The technology is there. It's been up and down the courts. There isn't such a technology in place presently, and there's a lot of work being done in that area to hopefully come up with a screening device that will, in fact, help deal with us. But, not to be commenting about the science associated with all of this, but there's some inherent difficulties and differences as well between alcohol in the body and marijuana in the body sort of thing. So there's issues there that need to be dealt with. This will be a long time being dealt with on all of these different issues. And like I say, the technology is not quite there yet. So there's a lot of challenges facing us. And that's why I feel quite comfortable in the things that we're doing in the medical side. And I do wish that the government, when they're finished and done with the recreational piece, that they will focus their time, energy, and resources to develop the rigor around medical cannabis so many more people can be helped with the medicine.
Well, share with us, please, what is happening as far as the development of medical cannabis is concerned. What are some of the things that you're planning on being able to address? What are some of the specific successes that point to medical cannabis as a viable answer when conventional medicine perhaps doesn't provide that solution?
Well, one of the things that we're doing with Aleafia and the patients that we have in the system now, we're doing studies that will help people get off of opiates, Percocet, Oxycontin, fentanyl, all those kinds of issues. And it's remarkable, really, what we're seeing so far. But at some point in time, I believe that as with every other drug that's developed and tested, eventually the health ministry have to designate and authorize the substance or the medicine with a drug identification number. That's not quite the case yet with medical cannabis, but there's that issue, and there's some people that are finding tremendous amount of help with their ailments, right down to children who are suffering from epilepsy, people post-cancer treatment scenarios, post-traumatic stress and anxiety issues. Certainly a lot with pain management. And like I mentioned to you, Roy, I found my conversion was basically during my time with Veterans Affairs. I mean, we didn't do everything well there, obviously, but we did quite a number of things that are helping veterans. And we're looking at how first responders can be helped too, the police, fire, and EMS scenario. So getting people off opiates, I think, is a huge, huge advantage, but also being more effective in treating some of these ailments that people are suffering from.
Julian, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. Executive Chairman of Aleafia, that's Aleafia, medical cannabis and health company. I'm sure we'll be talking again.